Terrifying day in New York. A firebomb explodes in a crowded subway car. No deaths. More tonight on the Tylenol warning. Even small doses over a long period can be a risk. And the wolf comes back to the west. What's the lesson from living with wolves up north?
From NBC News, this is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Life in New York City is always exciting. It can be hard, and it's sometimes dangerous. Well, today, the emphasis was on danger when an incendiary device exploded in a crowded subway car. For a time, there were reports of a second bomb and at least one death. But when the smoke cleared, no second bomb, no one dead, but many injured, many questions, and more chaos than usual in a crowded city. Here's NBC's Rahima Ellis.
The firebomb went off in the sixth car of a New York City subway train that had just stopped in Lower Manhattan at the Fulton Street station near Wall Street, a stop used by an average of 50,000 people a day. Hundreds of passengers ran out of the train in a panic, leaving their personal belongings behind.
Standing in the aisle, and I just heard an explosion.
It was just like a loud explosion. There's flames everywhere.
At least 37 people were injured, 3 critically. Police are questioning one passenger who was burned but refused treatment.
The report I had was mostly smoke inhalation, although some patients had some burning.
The explosion happened at 1:30, not rush hour, but still an extremely busy time of day here in Lower Manhattan, which was filled with holiday shoppers. Police say the firebomb was a crude incendiary device on the lap of a passenger when it exploded. While it caused a lot of smoke and flames, there was no structural damage to the train.
It is at this time believed that the device may have consisted of what is described as some type of glass jar filled with some type of flammable liquid.
The streets were filled with emergency vehicles in a scene reminiscent of the World Trade Center bombing of February 1993, only 2 blocks away. Unlike the devastation caused by that explosion, today's firebomb caused many injuries, but no one was killed. New York's mayor credited the city for not panicking. Police are not ruling anything out, but they're not sure whether the firebomb went off accidentally or intentionally. Rahima Ellis, NBC News, New York.
This subway explosion and the run of shootings at the White House coming all at once are unsettling, but they are acts of random violence. They're not connected. The man who was shot and critically wounded for not dropping a knife outside the White House yesterday now has been charged with assault and resisting a federal officer. NBC's Brian Williams tonight on the White House follow-up.
It was back to normal for the president today, despite 3 separate incidents of gunfire recently outside the White House grounds. His morning jog took him through a Washington public park along the Potomac River. Yesterday's shooting by U.S. Park Police of a homeless man with a knife has not brought about any visible increase in security around the White House, though at least one senior official here expressed concern over a current climate of uneasiness because of recent events. A senior official said the president was interested in the details of yesterday's shooting and is concerned about the random nature of violence and protecting what Mr. Clinton called the people's house. The White House is expressing confidence in the ability of the Secret Service to protect the president, while again denying that yesterday's incident had anything to do with him. But security concerns at the White House have now spread to the Capitol, specifically the safety of House Speaker-to-be Newt Gingrich. Because of death threats received since the November election, he'll now use a chauffeured government vehicle and be accompanied by armed bodyguards. This letter to Gingrich from the chief of the Capitol Police mentions the recent security-related incidents at the White House as part of the reason for concern about Gingrich's safety.
A senior White House official is also bothered by some recent comments from conservative radio talk show host G. Gordon Liddy, who said he nicknamed some firing range targets Bill and Hillary, and added that many members of the U.S. military had done the same thing in the past. The official called the comments part of a disturbing trend. Brian Williams, NBC News, the White House.
There is a breakthrough with North Korea to report tonight. The promised return later tonight of the remains of that U.S. Army pilot who died when his helicopter strayed over the DMZ and was shot down. The U.S. expects the other pilots still held by North Korea to be released and to be home before Christmas. Former President Jimmy Carter is back in Atlanta tonight. The temporary ceasefire that he brokered in Bosnia is to take effect on Friday. Carter also said that he worked out plans for a prisoner release. Meanwhile, at the State Department, where they usually take themselves so seriously, Press Secretary Mike McCurry as Santa, giving his boss, Warren Christopher, a 10-day vacation. McCurry is expected to be the new White House press secretary, where he'll need more than a beard and a funny hat to survive. When Nightly News continues in a moment, is a painkiller a potential killer? Progress getting those grounded ATRs back in the air again. And a national addiction is those infomercials. There's a new warning tonight about one of the world's most widely used painkillers, acetaminophen. It's sold mostly under the brand name of Tylenol. A new study shows that overuse or prolonged use can be hazardous to your health. NBC Science correspondent Robert Bazell now.
Heavy use of Tylenol and other brands of the painkiller acetaminophen doubles the risk of kidney failure, according to the study from Johns Hopkins. The researchers say it need not concern people who take the drugs for an occasional headache or cold. The danger, they say, is for those who take at least one pill every day, year after year.
The message I would say is if you're using any of these drugs, have a good reason for using it. And we shouldn't just use these drugs for a quick fix for every ill that befalls us.
Americans take a lot of acetaminophen. This year, Tylenol, the most popular brand, will sell 7 billion doses to 55 million American adults. The manufacturers of Tylenol urged caution in reacting to this latest study.
This report does nothing to alter the remarkable safety profile of Tylenol and should not discourage anyone from using it.
The Johns Hopkins researchers estimate that 8 to 10% of the 50,000 new cases of kidney failure a year are caused by heavy acetaminophen use. Tylenol bottles already carry a warning, saying people should not take the drug for long periods. Public health officials say consumers should know that many drugs sold over the counter have side effects, especially if they are taken for a long time. Robert Bazell, NBC News, San Francisco.
There is encouraging news tonight on the commuter airline front. NBC News has learned that those ATR aircraft grounded during icy weather could be flying again in the northern part of the country before very long. NBC's Robert Hager has more from Washington.
The government's considering a quick fix for flying ATR turboprops in icing conditions, new procedures which could be announced as soon as next week or shortly after the first of the year. The word comes as 6 days of intense flight tests wrapped up today at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Data is still being analyzed, but initial reports are no major problems were observed. A big Air Force tanker filled with water and equipped with a nozzle to spray it flew 3 hours each day in freezing conditions at high altitude. The ATR followed just 100 feet behind as the tanker sprayed a 9-foot-wide plume of freezing water on one wing at a time. A Learjet flew alongside to watch and photograph. The buildup of ice was observed, as well as performance of the plane's de-icing system and the handling of the plane. The government characterized first results as encouraging. The sticking point now is exactly what fix to apply to the problem. There are new products which can be put on the wings to retard icing in flight, and there are cockpit systems to detect a sudden worsening of conditions into which the plane is flying.
So long as a reliable fix can be found, the economic incentive to fly the planes again in the north is great. Grounding them has caused 14,000 passengers a day to seek alternate transportation and cost the airlines millions. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
Another consumer warning tonight concerning a hair relaxer which is called Rio. It's advertised as being all natural, but its results have been anything but that. The Food and Drug Administration has received more than 100 complaints about this product. Scalp burning, severe hair loss, hair turning green even. Rio's manufacturer now has agreed to stop selling it. Back in New York tonight, the nation's biggest city took a big step today toward going smoke-free. The city council voted to ban smoking in almost all public places. This measure now goes to the mayor, who is expected to approve it. And on Wall Street today, the Dow was up sharply in very heavy trading. The NASDAQ index was also up more than 8 points. Last night here, we reported on a sex discrimination lawsuit against Home Depot. Well, tonight that company said it is conducting an internal investigation into those charges, and it stands by its commitment to diversity in the workplace. Billions for some American cities. We'll tell you which ones and why in a moment. Exaggeration that many cities across the country are dreading the budget cuts that both sides in Washington now are promising. Today, however, President Clinton delivered a carrot to go with his stick. $2.3 billion in grants and tax breaks for 106 communities to be used in so-called empowerment zones. The idea here is to let the communities create jobs and boost their own economies independent of Washington. The big winners are 6 urban areas getting $100 million each. Rural areas and smaller cities also are included. What does it mean for them? Well, NBC's Jim Cummins tonight is in Waco, Texas.
San Antonio and in Waco.
Today in Waco, Texas, city leaders celebrated the news. Washington will try to rescue one of their neighborhoods with a $3 million grant.
The real solution is reinvestment and creating opportunity and hope. And that's what this is all about, and that's why we're all excited.
All of that in this neighborhood where half the families live below the poverty line, half the kids don't finish high school, and the unemployment rate is 15%, 3 times the rate for the rest of the county.
They dadgum sure need jobs, which I draw Social Security and retirement. But I don't need nothing but these people walking around here needs jobs.
It will be called an empowerment zone, and the objectives here are to develop 3,000 new jobs, 75 new businesses, and over 1,000 training opportunities in the next 10 years. The federal money will be used to attract private industry. Waco has one of the highest crime rates in Texas for cities its size, and much of that crime is in this neighborhood. In fact, the city has even posted signs declaring this a high drug activity area. Juan Cruz, who has owned a store on this corner for the past 30 years, is hoping the federal funds will help drive the bad guys out.
It's a lot of empty lots around here that maybe they could put some more, apartments or something like that. Maybe that'll run, It'll bring some good people into the neighborhood.
It's unusual for a city the size of Waco, 103,000, to get this kind of federal grant. One city official said that makes Waco a laboratory for change. The first experiments in this laboratory are expected to begin shortly after the first of the year. Jim Cummins, NBC News, Waco, Texas.
There was an unfortunate sign of the times in San Francisco today, the annual holiday food giveaway at Glide Memorial Church. The line stretched 7 blocks before the giveaway had even started. One church official said he'd never seen anything like this year's turnout. 12,500 people each received a bag of groceries. In other news tonight, the John F. Kennedy Library released more audio tapes of White House meetings during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. They show the pressure that President Kennedy was under to take military action. At one point, the then Senate Armed Services Chairman Richard Russell tells Kennedy that Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev was rattling his missiles and that the United States should invade Cuba. The man who was Kennedy's Secretary of State at the time, Dean Rusk, died today at his home in Georgia. The soft-spoken Southerner was an unapologetic defender of Cold War hard lines.
2 key appointees to President-elect Kennedy's cabinet meet in New York. Secretary of State Dean Rusk.
It was 1961. The Berlin Wall was going up. Containing communism was the center of U.S. foreign policy. Rusk would guide that policy for 8 years under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. There was the colossal failure at the Bay of Pigs. The CIA planned to take over Cuba with an exile army. Years later, Rusk called that a mistake.
This offensive military capability.
He was in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, declaring after Khrushchev removed the missiles, the other fellow just blinked. Then, Vietnam. As the country got more deeply involved, Rusk became one of the most outspoken defenders of the war and one of the biggest villains to war protesters. Later, he admitted 2 mistakes.
First, I underestimated the tenacity of the North Vietnamese. Compared to their population, they took frightful casualties and yet stayed with it. And I overestimated the patience of the American people.
After leaving government, he became a college professor in Georgia. He once said all he missed in Washington were his friends. When we come back in a moment, hooked on infomercials, find out why you're not alone.